Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. If you're out west with Ross, it's early still. But welcome to the CLA webinar. Oh, Karen's in Los Angeles. Hello, Karen. Kelly from Tennessee. So yeah, go ahead and say hi to each other in the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from. You have found the How to Start a Laundromat webinar that CLA puts on every month for those of you looking to buy or build your first laundromat. So as you can see, we got a lot of people just joining here, and so we're going to give it just a moment. But I see Riverside County, Dallas, Ann Kill from Missouri, San Diego, Illinois, Springfield. Nice. So it's good to see everybody. Bolingbrook, Levis, I grew up in Bolingbrook. That's unbelievable. We'll talk offline. Although I'm sure I lived there long ago compared to you. Um, okay, good stuff. And Andrew is in the chat. Everybody, Andrew's on our team, and he's going to be sort of facilitating some of the resources that we're going to be covering over the next 90 minutes or so. So by way of just doing a little bit of housekeeping, like I said, you're in the right spot for CLA's monthly webinar on how to start a laundromat. You can see that we're using the Zoom webinar platform. So I will direct you to not only the chat, but perhaps more importantly, find the question and answer box, because this is a lot more interesting for us if it's not a lecture and more of taking your questions. I'll keep an eye on both, but it's easier for me to kind of read your questions in the questions bar. And like I said, we've got some prepared material to share with you, but we will, interrupt ourselves quite frequently to kind of work our way through your questions. Another piece of housekeeping is that we are recording. Okay, we are recording. That's the most common question. We are recording, and we will make the slides and the recording available after the fact. We'll reach out to you and do some follow-up. So certainly feel free to keep notes, but just know that you're going to have access to all this great content after the fact. Let's see, what else was I going to tell you? Yeah, I think that's a pretty good place to start. So let me sort of jump into these slides here. I'll do a few other reminders, but then we'll kind of get on with some of the introductions, and I'll introduce you to Ross here in just a moment. But you may be asking, who are you? What is this all about? Who did I sign up with? Well, so CLA is a nonprofit trade association that's been serving the laundry industry for well over 60 years, something like 65 years. And like a lot of trade associations, we are in service to the industry. Our mission is to support and grow the business. And we feel that a big part of that is to do our level best to educate first-time potential investors, not just because we're nice people and we like to help you out, that's true, but we also think it's good for the health of our industry if you're able to go into this endeavor well educated, have a lot of resources, and do your best to put your hands on the best information available so you're making a good investment, and that frankly supports the health of the business. And so I'll make some reference to the other things that we do here along the way, but suffice it to say that we provide education, we do a lot of events, we do a lot of the advocacy for the industry, which is sort of the legislative and lobbying piece, and then we have a number of business services that we've created through our Strength in Numbers to better support what you're up to. It can be kind of a solo endeavor to be a laundromat owner, and so we'd like to do our level best to be an extension of your team. Okay, now who are these guys? So I'll introduce myself, and then I'll let Ross say a few words. So, my name is Brian Wallace. I'm very fortunate to serve as president and CEO of the association. I've been in the industry for 32 years and have served in this role at CLA over the last 25 or so years. And so I'm really lucky where I've been able to crisscross the country, travel around the world talking laundromats, spending a lot of time with really successful operators like Ross and trying to listen and synthesize and be in a position to share back. So I'm kind of the academic, if you will, whereas folks like Ross are the real practitioners and experts out in the field. And so I'm really pleased to host this opportunity every month and have great people like Ross come on as co-hosts, and he's going to help me field some of these questions. So Ross Dodds is an owner-operator of multiple stores out in Southern California. We're super stoked that he's going to be joining our board of directors come January. So Ross, thanks so much for joining us, and feel free to tell the folks a little bit more about yourself.
Hey, thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited for this. We just did a similar event out in Chicago, and it was awesome. Yeah, I'm out in Los Angeles. I got in the industry back in 2014, and currently operate 12 locations, including a private pickup and delivery facility that's
Mhm.
close to the public. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean that's just scratching the surface of Ross's experience and expertise, and he'll be weighing in some more as we kind of work our way through some of the prepared content. But wealth of knowledge, and always been very generous. And if do yourself a favor, make sure you're following Ross on the socials because he is a content machine and is always out there helping answer questions. So. This is just a reminder of two things. I saw a bunch more people joined on. We are recording the presentation, and so you'll have access to this after the fact. And then be sure to say hi in the chat and start to populate that question and answer box with some of the things that you really want to learn about the industry before you jump in. And I've got an eye on that. So we'll be pausing and taking your questions. So, but I'm going to start at the top here and just try to do a little bit of level setting for the group with just a little bit of a tail of the tape about the industry and what we're all about here. So um, we've said laundromat, we said laundry, coin laundry, laundromat, laundromat, lavanderia, washateria, if you're in Texas. We're all talking about one thing, which is essentially the core business is self-service laundry. So all those names I just mentioned are interchangeable and describe kind of a retail setting where we're providing equipment that's available on a self-service basis. For point of clarity, what we're not talking about are the vended laundry equipment machines that you would find in an apartment building or dormitory or condo or something like that. That's really considered, believe it or not, kind of a separate industry structured differently. Great business. They have their own association, MLA, which is the Multi-Housing Laundry Association. So we're really just going to be focused on that neighborhood laundromat for the sake of this conversation. And we've got about 29,000 stores. That's a rough estimate, admittedly. It's just a very fragmented business and not always easy to get your arms around all the detailed information about the business. A highly conservative estimate on sales volume would be this 5 to 6 billion. It's probably closer to $8 or $10 billion all in. Um, the statistical average, and I'll mention a number of statistics along the way here that come from our annual benchmarking survey that we do at CLA. It's a helpful way to understand some of the basics and is something that's a free resource to our members that comes out every year. So drawing from that is the statistical mean of a store that's 2,850 square feet. And of course, the stores can range greatly based on the size of the market. And, Ross, across those dozen stores, maybe you can give folks some flavor of we were talking about that before we came on air, the wide variety among even just the stores that you're operating. So give us a little sense of how those spread out in terms of square footage.
Yeah, I mean, we ranged from about our smallest store being 1,400 to our largest self-serve store being 3,500, and then
Okay.
our facility is over 6,000.
Mm. So that offsite facility, and would you sort of agree with the premise that these stores are at least ideally sort of sized to the market that they're serving? In other words, maybe the larger stores in a more densely populated area where the smaller store is not, or it could be just what was available from a real estate standpoint to build out in.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen the industry change so much, and the machine size too. I mean,
Hmm.
we
Mhm.
used to build stores that only contain top loaders, and many operators like myself, we don't even put in top loaders anymore. So we just had to grow store size to be able to accommodate the equipment, let
Mhm.
alone the demand too. I think has increased as our neighborhoods have gotten fuller.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. So that's a nice way to kind of size up that. And I imagine most SoCal operators are leasing their spaces, not so many opportunities to acquire the real estate. But I think that kind of holds true for most of our members around the country. I think most would have an aspiration to try to buy the real estate where they can, but most are leasing their spaces. Those that might be in a more of a suburban or rural area might be more likely to have the opportunity to buy the building. But just know that most of our members are under a lease, and we're going to be talking a lot about leases before we sign off here because it's such an important component. Who are we serving? Like, who are these main customers? Well, I mean, we hope we're doing laundry for everybody, or at least have the opportunity to do laundry for everyone. But our core customer tends to be a lower income to maybe middle income, someone living in an apartment, often sort of on a multi-generation households, maybe no easy access to washers or large enough washers in their space. I mean, Ross, if you had to sort of draw, a picture of the kind of your ideal customer, what would that profile look like for you based on your experience in the market that you're in?
I mean, we definitely focus on the either a family or a single mother, a couple kids, and I mean, here in Los Angeles, we're much heavier on rental than probably most other places, and I mean, Chicago and New York would be in there too. But we're seeing more and more multi-generational households living
Mhm.
together. So that's pushing the needs for our laundromats to have larger size machines because they're the one person or the whole family comes to the laundry and does it all at once for a week. They need 8 machines now instead of 2.
And we
So
like that.
we do.
We do like that. Yeah, and I mean, it's like I said, it's the more people, the more dirty clothes. Again, a conservative estimate around 20 million families using laundromats every year. You'll see estimates as much as double that, but just to be conservative. And we are seeing more people that do have a home washer or the equivalent of a home washer come to us for that time savings and convenience, like Ross said, because these people have more laundry, especially if there's more people in the household. So that's just meant to kind of give you just like kind of a general orientation to the business. And we can get into some more of those details along the way. Here's my reminder: somebody break the ice. Ask some questions, and we'll be getting to those as we uh, go along. And David, you get the gold star for putting in the first question. For those new to the industry and looking to start out, I'm curious about a buy versus build strategy. Okay, buy versus build. Now, I will tell you that later in the presentation, I've got a chart with pros and cons of buying versus building. But since we have an expert here, Ross, what has been your approach? I think if I remember right, have you solely done acquisitions?
Yes, yes. I mean, I hear in other parts of the country, it can be quite easy to work with the city and permits and whatnot. Here in Los Angeles, that is not the case. And actually, we're seeing more and more cities. Actually, I don't think we're immune or the only out here in Southern California, but cities are starting to do hookups fees, impact
Hmm.
fees,
Impact fees, yeah.
to add more um, sewer stuff. So that can be very, very expensive. We're seeing as high as $30,000 a machine, if you were building, and that we have even some cities that have a ban on building new laundromats. So that's just led us to skip that and
Yeah, yeah, of
just
course.
acquire. I
Hmm.
mean, I have been unfortunate enough to go through the permitting process because we had a fire in our first laundromat. So that basically was a new build. Um,
Hmm.
so that gave me my taste of it, that I probably didn't want to do that again.
No, fair enough. And just to broaden that out a little bit, David, beyond Ross's experience is, yeah, I would say the majority of our first timers are making an acquisition. And, the upsides, if you will, in short, would be things like it's sort of a known entity. Hopefully, it's a proven location. It's hopefully cash flowing on day one upon making the purchase. Some of the drawbacks are that you're sort of inheriting any issues that are there. You may be on the shorter end of a lease. You may have some equipment that's a little bit older or has maintenance issues. So, like I said, there's pros and cons, and when it comes to building new, Ross talked about some of the challenges being it's a higher initial investment. You have sort of the red tape process to go through. By definition, it's not yet a proven location. The flip side, the benefits of that is new sells, bright, shiny new, gets people excited. It tends to have a little bit more of a upside over the longer term. You're starting out fresh with the latest and greatest equipment and technology. You're at the beginning of what hopefully is a very long lease. So there are pros and cons, and we'll come back to this, like I said, a little bit later in the presentation, but um, it's a matter of I think just letting each opportunity sort of live and die on its own merits, right? So don't get too locked into one or the other. At least that would be my advice. And but that is one of the essential questions that you're going to be facing at this early stage, whether to buy or build. Karen, I see your question here about what are the best resources to conduct demographic research for selecting a neighborhood to open a laundromat. I'm looking for tools or platforms that could provide data and proximity to competing businesses. So Karen, good question on demographic analysis. CLA has a great white paper on this topic and has videos and other resources on demographics and site selection. But I'll tell you, there's a couple of things to kind of guide you. One is that typically, if you're getting engaged with a laundromat broker or a laundromat distributor for equipment, they tend to have access to good demographic information, and they may even provide you with some of that analysis that you're asking about. Do they have a sales motivation? Yes. Does that mean that you should disregard what they're sharing with you? No. But this you use it as one resource in the overall picture to make sure that you are getting all the information you can, and please don't discount what a local expert could bring to the table. Now, you can get raw demographics often from a local municipality. There's plenty of online resources. Just Google demographic reports. One that we've done a fair amount of work with is idealspot.com, like finding the ideal spot for your store. And they do allow for some of what you mentioned here, Karen, in terms of plotting existing stores, creating heat maps based on certain criteria that you would call out. So there are a bunch of good online sources. There's one that's called Easy Demographics, EASI. So there are just a bunch of them out there that can provide that. But part of the key is aligning yourself with a laundry expert that can help you interpret the data, interpret what it's telling you, because there's really two pieces to it, right? It's the sort of the raw demographics of who's in this market and do they fit the laundromat profile, but also the competitive analysis, right? Looking at the existing stores. both from a quantity and quality standpoint, to better understand that. So it is a big, important topic, Karen. We've got some good resources on that that I can share with you as well. Anything that you would add, Ross, to the question about demographics and evaluating sites?
I mean, definitely just take time to go to the laundromats in your area. I never did so much laundry before I bought my first laundry, um, because you're able to, when you're in there for an hour or so, you're able to really start to understand what you would want your business to look like and what is
Mhm.
working in somebody else's location and not working. And you're also seeing everybody from the neighborhood that's coming in, what that looks like in your area. Because I mean, in-person live is always better than what's going to be available on a piece of paper. Um, so
Mhm.
just keep going to all the different laundries, and you'll start to get a feeling. My position on what my ideal laundromat was going to be changed the more I started going and doing laundry at laundromats. Um, so yeah,
That is by far my favorite piece of advice. I give it all the time. If you're really serious about this, put a couple loads of laundry in your car, throw it in the trunk, and then just stop everywhere you can and just do lots of laundry. Because again, you're learning, like Ross said, what you like, what you don't like, but you're also beginning to build a little bit of a competitive analysis in your area. So when you stop at these stores, how many machines they have, where the vend price is, how many parking spaces, grade them on cleanliness. Did someone come up and greet you? Like, kind of start building a dossier of these local stores by making those visits. And that's going to really come in handy as you go through the process a bit further. Um, Sakina's got a question about funding there for your first venture. And yes, we've got a couple slides on that a little bit later. But what we'll tell you, Sakina, is that the majority of the funding in this industry is happening through what we would probably call captive lenders or laundromat specific lenders. The appetite for small business loans in general is not great. And I think a lot of those conventional lenders know even less about laundromats and some of the unique aspects of the business. So a lot of what's happening in terms of funding is happening from an internal standpoint, and I'll spell that out a little bit further for you a little bit as we go along. But it's going to be some combination of the resources that you're bringing, which whether you're buying or building would probably be a good place to start, is around 30% of the total project cost in cash. And then obviously the qualification to borrow the balance would be a kind of a nice short version. But we'll get into a little bit more of those resources as we go along, and we'll tap into Ross a little bit about how he's handled that over time. Let me jump back over to David asking about sourcing acquisitions. I've got a video on this on my Laundromat FAQs at the CLA YouTube channel. Because finding stores to buy, Ross, is not necessarily an easy process, right? There are some listings out there on LoopNet and BizBuySell, and there's brokers out there, but I think that's another situation where getting out there and making a lot of visits and introducing yourself to existing operators can go a long way. Am I right?
yeah. I mean, Craigslist isn't what it used to be.
So
Um,
true. So true.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of made its rounds on the internet with some different videos of sending off letters that I'm interested in laundries. I receive at least 5 a week now, so people really took to that one. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important to network in your area, and try to find if there's like an in-person meetup with CLA coming up, because that's where you're going to meet the owners and also meet the owners that are open
Right. Right.
to talking with their neighbors. So
Yep.
we've come a long way in the industry of how open everybody is, I think, of talking, even with their closest competitor, so to speak. There's tons of laundry out here, so it's not a concern like it used to be.
Yeah, no, that is an industry that is willing to share. And thank you, Andrew. He just put a link to my Laundromat FAQs in the chat. It is something that we talk about building that laundry network, meeting the distributors, meeting the brokers, meeting other store owners, start to build your network. Yes, and look at the online listings and talk to brokers. And it's just there's just the process. But I will tell you, David, and some of the others that are asking, that it's just laundromats are hot right now. The listings are not typically flush with opportunity after opportunity, so it's gotten a little bit more scarce. But that's not to discourage you, just to try to frame it up for you that you're not going to typically find, well, here's 20 stores I can choose from and decide which one I want to buy. Most markets, it's a little skinnier than that as we go along. So, well, let's do this. Thank you for populating the questions. I see there's a bunch more in the queue that I'll get to, but let's get through a few more slides here just to make sure that we're keeping pace. But we'll
I
make
wouldn't
sure
go
that
buy a list. Let's say that though.
I'm sorry, one more, don't
I
buy
wouldn't
them.
go buy a list. I'm
I
seeing a lot more of that pop up on some of the forums that are a little less policed, and I don't think it's necessary. You need somebody in your area, not somebody creating.
right, right,
Because I saw a
right.
list recently and my store was listed on it. So that they're not even in my state.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a buyer beware situation. So what I thought I'd do with this next section is because I'll there is a lot of hype out there. There's a lot of positive stuff, well-earned positive content about the business. And there's also some distortions and maybe some misdirection that's also going on out there. So I'm gonna kind of go through a list of why we think you should pursue laundromats or could pursue laundromats, what our members like about the business. But then I'm going to follow it up with a slide about what are the challenges, pitfalls, some of the headwinds, if you will. Because again, I don't see like it's our job to recruit you into the business. I think it's our job to give you the information that you need to make a good decision. So let's go through that pros and cons, and then we'll tap back into your questions. I see Mitchell's got one, Luis's got a question, Sarah's got a question. So we'll make sure we get back to that. But at its core, people like this business because it's a very steady, essential service. It is one of those rain or shine type businesses where we're providing essential service. We've performed well during recessionary periods and most recently in the pandemic. That don't read that as we were unaffected. We were definitely affected. We'd rather not do a recession. Certainly rather not do a pandemic again. I think what we are saying is that our industry held up a lot better than most, especially as we talk to people that are in other retail or service businesses. And so that steady nature of the business has also been a factor. A lot of people misrepresent the business as being easy, but it is simple in the sense that the keys to success are pretty evident. And again, I'll let Ross provide a rebuttal to this here in a second for any of this that I got wrong. But you need to have a great location. It needs to be cleaned. The equipment needs to work. You need to have great customer service. But the execution is hard. That's why you see so many stores that are in rough shape that are for sale. It's a simple business. It's not inventory. It's not receivables. It's not hundreds of employees. It is a little bit more simple, which is attractive to our members. And while we tend to reject the notion that it's passive or absentee, definitely one of the things that I hear the most from our experienced members is this notion of being a flex time business, where, of course, like anything else, you need to put the work in, but it's not during prescribed hours. Typically, it's not a 9 to 5. You're a night owl, you're an early bird. You like to catch up on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. You have extra time on the weekends. You've got a day job and spend time at the store at night. It's more of that type of flexibility. So I hear a lot of I like to get away for weekends, or I like to coach little league or drive my kids to school. You hear those kinds of elements and kind of lifestyle considerations around the business. And this kind of gets to a question, maybe Sarah's question about franchises in a sense that, This is a highly fragmented business. For all that we've just talked about, before we came on camera, Russ and I were talking about if you look at on a population of almost 30,000 as an estimate, the number of folks that have 50 or more, you can count on one hand. And if you're talking about 100 stores, I don't think we got anyone with 100, maybe just under that. So it's highly fragmented, which means that in the case of Ross and Lux Laundries, be sure to Google them and see what he's up to. As an individual owner operator, you can build a 12 store chain. You can build a nicely branded thing. You don't have to be part of a national chain or a franchise. And while a lot of our members are availing themselves of the franchise opportunity, either because many of you have had experience being a franchisee in other industries, or you're looking for sort of that package approach. I think it's just all part of your research. Buy, build, franchise, go through the distributor. It's really a matter of doing that homework. So when I say why laundromats, Ross, which of these things would you take off, or what things would you add to this list? Did I miss anything about what sort of attracts you and your peers to the business?
No, yeah, I mean, I think this is a great list. I think we're starting to see more availability to tap into other technology and resources that have been used in other industries,
Hmm.
and laundry for
Hmm.
some reason just stayed a little behind. But I mean, since I got into the business, rather you're hybrid or all coin or all card, um, we have a call center that answers the phone for us now. Um, when at what point do you start with a manager, or are you the manager when you first get in? When do you place the key staff? Are you going to be fully attended, unattended? There's so many things that go into it, but a lot more tools that you can implement for not very much money
Hmm.
much
Hmm.
earlier than I did.
Well,
to,
it's a little bit of learn as you go. So give
yeah.
yourself a break there, Ross. But I think that the trend toward multi-store ownership, not thousands of stores or hundreds of stores, but a lot of our friends are in that, what, 4 to 6 stores, kind of 4 to 6 store range. It's been facilitated by the technology, right? It's a little bit less cash dependent with respect to the payment systems. You've got networked machines, you've got digital marketing that you can employ to draw customers. And so it's a little bit easier, I think, to become that multi-store owner, given the technologies that we're now onboarding in our business. So, and that's frankly one of the things that many of you as newbies bring to it, right? Because you've used technologies in other contexts, whether it be a career job or another small business, and you say, well, why can't this work for the laundry business? And we certainly welcome that. So as I promised, I was going to offset that. We're not going to get into doom and gloom, but I do want to give you some things that I think do should give you some pause, or at least things that you want to make sure that you're talking about. And in this first one, we've already discussed to some extent, which is, there's a scarcity now in some markets when it comes to either good sites to build on or stores available. So that just talks about patience, and that your timeline might be a little bit longer. I'm hearing a lot of this, 30 days to your first laundromat. And then I saw one 15 days to your first laundromat. And I say that is just not our typical member experience. You're talking about many months. We've got people that have been looking for a year or longer. We've got new store builds that are taking a year or longer, even from experienced operators that know what they're doing. It's the red tape, it's getting the contractors together, getting everything together. So, again, this is not to discourage, but this is our job to tell you like it is in an environment where maybe not everybody is doing that. So one of the challenges is availability. I'll get through this list, Ross, and let you rebut again. One thing that I know Ross can speak to, and I run into this with a lot of the folks that I'm coaching on a day-to-day basis. Um, there's no shame in this, but not all of you are cut out to deal with the public in this environment, and it does come with its challenges. Any of you have worked retail, dealing with the public can be a bit of a challenge. And when, frankly, you're in a laundromat setting, you're going to get a front row seat to some of the societal ills that are out there. And some of you are going to be great at it and deal with it really well. And you like this euphemism, Ross? I can see you chuckling. But I think it's important. I had a member not long ago, we had this conversation and she took this advice that Ross gave about she went out to 15 or 20 laundromats to do laundry, and she called me back. She goes, "You guys have been great at CLA. I've learned so much, but I'm going to be your shortest tenured member ever. This is not for me." And so I congratulated her for her candor and just being self-aware about, if you're really cut out for it. So go out and do laundry. Um, and the other big challenge that we're going to touch on some more, and has already come up in your questions, is probably the number one challenge I run into is sort of the financial wherewithal to do the first project. So whether that's a buy or a build, a lot of aspiring first-time entrepreneurs, I don't care what industry it is, it's that bootstrapping, that pulling it together to fund the first project is probably the biggest challenge. And again, I'm going to have another slide that'll get into a little more detail there. But and again, you'll tell me if this will fly in SoCal, Ross. But I think that some of the best I can't tell you that the financial aspect is a big challenge for a lot of people without giving you some context. And every project needs its own specific bidding, like impact fees, like Ross said. But I think if you start at $300 or $400 a square foot, and this would be for a vanilla box or an existing retail space to convert, not talking about the real estate, just the leasehold improvements, buying the equipment, installing the equipment, and opening for business, I think you need to start at $300 or $400 a square foot. And so, yes, that I said 2,850 square feet earlier. So yeah, most new store builds are $1 million or more. And certainly can go much higher than that. So, and again, say none of this to discourage you, just giving you a realistic look at what it typically takes to build out a store. And as I talk to a lot of builders on a regular basis, I'll hear $500, $600 or even more. So you need to kind of calibrate kind of what this total project cost is. So Ross, as I outline some of the challenges here, I want to give you a chance to add or rebut or anything else you want to comment on this list.
No, I mean, I think that's a fair number. I mean, we have seen all industries have seen huge price increases, and laundromats did not miss that.
Right.
So the cost to get in has definitely gone up a lot compared to how I started in the business. I would say it would be very hard for me to start that way again. And But the good news is, when we get into talking about the captive lending, there are some great banks that specialize in this that can really help you, but it's not going to be without some cash needed for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's just realistic, right? I mean, I talk to people and I think it's great. People come to me and say, well, I've got 50,000 saved, or I've got 25,000 saved, or I've got 100,000 saved. And that's awesome. But it's typically not going to be enough to get into your first laundromat project. But we've had people that'll join for a couple of years, do the research, start, get a partner, raise more money, save, and get to a point where you can really go ahead and pull the trigger there.
And I feel like I'm seeing more and more talk around seller financing, and that's how you instantly get into the business without money. It's not saying that that opportunity might not be there somewhere in the country, and seller financing can be quite common in larger projects, but it is just one piece of the whole deal. So if the bank is going to do 60 or 70%, seller financing will typically only be 10% of the project, and then you're going to be the other 20, 30+%. So I'm not going to say it's not possible for something more, but on what I see as common, seller financing will only be a very, very small piece. So don't get sold on the idea that that's how you're going to do this.
I would say that the seller financing is by far the most oversold aspect of what we're seeing out there now. Yes, there are certain circumstances when it happens, but I would not rely on it. It's not terribly common in my experience, and I see hundreds of people a week come across my desk. So if it's out there, great, but I would not would not rely on that. And oftentimes, when there is seller financing involved, there's a problem with the project. They don't have records. There's some other challenge that the project doesn't qualify for more conventional means. So leave it all open. I'll get to a slide. You'll see it on a slide here in a few minutes, but don't overvalue that. And then Ross, you chuckled a bit when I was talking about engaging with the general public. Did you want to add any more color to that?
Yeah, I mean, you really see all walks of life
Right.
in the laundry. I mean, and there was actually just a topic yesterday or over the weekend in one of the forums talking about homeless, and like others said in that topic, we have homeless that come in and do laundry just like any other customer, and they will leave the space cleaner than they arrived. And then you have some that will come in and who knows what additional issues they're having in their life besides just being unhoused, and it can be a struggle. And then you can have on the other side, you can have your high-end customer that can be your absolute worst. I mean, it just and
I
everybody has a
imagine you
bad
run into
day.
that. I imagine you run into that in the laundry delivery space with
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I always used to say, especially if you're attended, laundries are kind of like bars. You're the bartender is the therapist half the time, and when somebody's coming in to do laundry once a week or twice a week, they really get to know who's in there, and it
Mhm.
becomes like therapy. So if you're uninterested in talking to people, then you really need to have another face in front to deal with that. So
Yeah, yeah. No, and again, we've got plenty of successful members that let's say they're not a people person, but they've got staff, like they've got a manager, they've got attendants that do an awesome job connecting with the public. And we've got members that that's what they look forward to. They go into the store on a regular basis. They can name every customer by first name. They're talking about what's going on in the neighborhood. So just want to make you aware that that's sort of part of the puzzle here. So um, the next slide I have here is on valuation. So, and that's a little bit deeper topic. So let me do a little catch up on some of these questions. Mitchell is asking about the competitive landscape and market demand. I mean, the first thing I'll say, Mitchell, is it definitely is more art than science, right? So if you've got a market and say there's 5 laundromats that are there, you're trying to determine, does it need a 6th laundromat? Well, you can look just at the head count and say, well, that's too many. But what you really need to look at is, really grading these stores. Number one, are they all dumps? Are they all zombie mats? What is the condition of those stores? Is there a store that's pretty good, but it's got limited parking? Is there a better location that's come available that is easier access from the street or that has a better parking situation? And so, there are some techniques that you can go through, and we've got white papers and resources to try to estimate what those existing stores are doing. And then it's kind of well, if I'm going to be in the 6th store, does that mean that I'm going to get 15% of the available business? And if I'm going to get my 1/6, is that going to be enough to make the project work? The math typically doesn't work like that. It's a little bit more intuitive and qualitative in terms of how well are those customers currently being served. But it certainly begins with the analysis of the raw demographics, but it also relies very heavily on your evaluation of the existing inventory. And one of the things I try to point out to folks, Ross, is that to a large extent, laundry is a bit finite, right? There's only so much laundry within a given area. And the weekend before you open your store, everyone's doing their laundry somewhere else, an apartment, a home, one of the existing laundromats. And so your kind of challenge is, well, how do I do it better? Like, how do I bring in the lion's share of the people because I have a better location, it's bright, it's clean, it's well equipped, larger machines, friendly service, et cetera. So I'm sure you can give us some examples among your 12 where you've got quite a few competitors, but you feel like you're getting the lion's share.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about the size of store. That's really started to shift in the last 10 years, especially here in Los Angeles compared to what I used to see. We have so many locations around LA where stores are across the street from each other. And in some neighborhoods, that still makes sense and they can
Right.
still both survive. In
Hmm.
other neighborhoods, we're seeing either one of them take over or we're seeing a new third larger one come in and take out the other two. Um, Again, that goes to how you're running your business, what and rather you're keeping up with what is expected in your area. You and if you're leasing, it goes back to your lease. Do you have a good lease? Because as things are getting more expensive, I think that's why we're seeing bigger stores because you just need more business to be able to pay those bills. In the
Hmm.
past, a small store was great. Um, so it just depends. And I mean my 1,400 square foot store, my smallest store, is one of my most profitable stores. It just happens to be that neighborhood, that location. Anywhere else, it doesn't. It literally checks no boxes of where you want to put a laundry. It
Yeah.
has no parking. It has. It's in an apartment building. It's small. I mean, it checks no boxes. It just works for that particular city.
Yeah. No, fair enough. No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's see here down the list. Levis is asking, hey, Brian, with you being in Chicago, what advice would you give a Chicago newbie? Well, why don't I'll say this for everybody, and I'll give you some information and a promo code at the end for joining the association. Everyone who joins the association gets an automatic link to my personal calendar to book a consultation. And I also have access to fellow members like Ross and many, many others like him. So get plugged in. But when it comes to Chicago, we can talk about that offline and try to point you in the right direction. But it's very similar to what has been happening in a lot of markets where there's just a little bit scarcity of inventory. I think there's a lot of stores that need some upgrading, to say the least. And some of the markets have changed demographically, so we can talk some more about that. Marcy's asking about how do you know when you're financially ready to start looking to buy? But again, I think this slide speaks to that to a certain extent, Marcy. Again, there are different price points for different types of stores and different types of builds. But if I had to boil it down to one thing, you probably need, a few $100,000 in cash to sort of get started, to whether it's buying or building. But that is a good place to begin. It doesn't hurt to go through some pre-qualification, understand really what you can put your hands on before you get too far in the process. I see a lot of situations where folks come to us here at the association, they're already well down the path and then they just sort of realize that they're really undercapitalized in terms of being able to do the project. Mitchell, your question I'm going to pose to the guy on screen who's called Lux Laundries. When positioning our brand, what are your thoughts on offering a more luxury experience in brand to low or middle income customers? That's Mitchell's question, Ross. What would you say? And kind of maybe was the thought behind your Lux Laundry branding?
I mean, I think what it boils down to is everybody likes nice things. And if laundry happens to be, I mean, most people don't enjoy doing laundry. They don't say, "Oh, Saturday morning, let's go do some laundry." So we just, and part of that came from all of the laundry I did before buying the first one was like, why is this such a terrible place? You go into older laundromats, they're still out there, they're getting fewer and fewer as um, uh, the other Brian coined it the zombie mat. Um, the lights are turned off, or there's three strings. One string of lights is on. Um, it's just not kept up. 50% of the machines are out of order, and I just and here in Los Angeles, like I would pay for a meter with a credit card, and then I'd walk in the store, and the only options was quarters. So then I had to go over to the bank to either get cash or get quarters. Everything was a struggle to me to go to the laundromat, and it shouldn't be a struggle. You want to make it as easy as possible for somebody and make it not their worst task. And if that happens to be the clean laundromat, the bright laundromat, then that's what it is. And uh, I mean, because it is a task that everybody has to do, obviously, pricing is sensitive in the market for the lower income, but they have it budgeted out too. And then depending on your town or city, you can do different outreach programs or partner with different organizations in the area to try to do some program for super low income. There's lots of ways to do it, but I wouldn't say, oh, I can't be priced this way or I can't build it nice because the income level's too low to afford it. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've done a great job with it, and I've certainly seen that with other members that have built, sort of premium brands in some of the tougher neighborhoods. And like I said, customers are customers to a large extent. They want it to be, they want it to be nice. Where else are you spending 2 hours a week?
Yeah.
You want to
And
spend,
they start to when you build it nice, then I think a lot of times we have more respect from our customers for the space. It's not going to say, I mean, you'll see my posts. So I always have something going on. Um, and and uh, and I post stuff like that to just remind people it's not just collecting money and running in the background all by itself. There's always something happening, and there's always a challenge. But for the greater part of it, our customer base also really takes care of the place because they're proud of it. It's in
right,
their
right.
neighborhood. Um,
Hmm.
so
What I love is some of these examples where sometimes our member laundromat is the nicest business, the nicest facility of any kind in that neighborhood, and it's that expression of care and value that brings the goodwill to that laundromat because oftentimes, like I said, the other businesses maybe aren't, achieving that same level. So, well, let me get through a few more slides here because the question of valuation comes up quite often, and it deserves more than one slide, and it's probably a 3-hour topic.
yeah.
But what's a laundromat worth? We have great white papers, videos, other resources through CLA that you can tap into. But if I had to boil it down to one slide, and again, I'll kind of walk through this and let Ross add to it or rebut. Um, Again, it comes down to what you're willing to offer and they're willing to take. And typically laundromats are valued on a multiple of the net based on the nature of the business. And there's plenty of stores that make an awful great margin, and there's some stores that are underwater, right? So valuing a business on gross really doesn't get you there because it fluctuates greatly. With the big asterisk, historically, laundromats tend to sell from 3 to 5 times the net. That doesn't mean what they're worth. That's what they sell for. And that is on a historical, looking back 20, 30 years. Lately, we've seen those valuations climb higher. particularly for those higher volume, larger stores. I'm not shocked when I hear 6 or 7 times net that are coming out of those facilities. But it really comes down to the following, not just the net income, but age and condition of the equipment and the terms and duration of the lease, right? So we'll get into leases a little bit further, but let's start with equipment. Equipping a store is a big chunk of that $300 or $400 a square foot I mentioned earlier. And it's really the big capital expense. So by nature, a lot of the inventory of what's out there for sale, um, those stores have not been recapitalized, right? They're running old equipment, and part of the rub is it's for sale. You could probably put your hands on it, but it may need 400, 500, 600, $700,000 worth of equipment, right? And so an educated buyer is going to take that into consideration. By the same token, you can't pick up and move a laundromat. So the time and the duration of that lease is paramount. And so a lot of the inventory that you'll see for sale, oh, there's 4 years left on a lease, there's 3 years, there's 5 years, there's 6 years left. And, by an educated buyer standpoint, it's unsaleable at that level. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go, but the longer the lease, the newer the equipment, the more the store is worth. The shorter the lease, the older the equipment, the less the store is worth. And it may even be unsaleable depending on how old the equipment is and how short the lease is. And so when you say 3 to 5, or a store that sells for 2, or a store that sells for 7, it's really being driven by those factors. And so the last couple things here is the due diligence, right? Due diligence can be challenging when you're buying a cash business, and some of you may have experienced this already, where there's no records, or there's 2 sets of records, or there's something that's not quite right when it comes to that. So, I think looking at a multiple of the net, looking at what your return on investment is going to look like, but really understanding that the equipment and the lease have a lot to do with what you ought to be paying for the store. So, Ross, the floor is yours because you've been through this many, many times.
Yeah, I mean, I think we recently added to the CLA website a pro forma
Yeah.
uh, worksheet. And when I was first starting out, luckily I got my hands on a really good one that I could understand. Um, and I would plug in the machines as they are, the prices as they are, and if the person says, "Oh, I'm doing 10,000 a month," then I would play with on a pro forma. It's going to be how many turns each machine does in a day. So you start playing with that, and you could find where you hit that $10,000 number, and then kind of back out from there. Does that make sense? I think uh, an acceptable industry average is 3.5 turns a day on machines, for lending purposes too. So I first want to see what they're currently doing. And then if I plan on doing a remodel or all new equipment or part new equipment, then I change that pro forma, plugging in what that new equipment looks like, what my pricing might change to. And even if I'm paying cash, other people probably do it differently, but if I plug in that I'm financing the entire project, because I want to know what that loan payment is going to be, and I also want that to work out on self-serve only. We're seeing more and more walk it or fluff and fold and pick up and delivery, and I see a ton of people when they're looking to get in for the first time, they're projecting and planning fluff and fold and pick up and delivery within their business. You need to, unless it's already there and they've already built that side of the business up, I would caution to make your numbers work on self-serve. And then if you decide to add in the walk-in fluff and fold or the pickup and delivery, that can operate as its own business separate, but you need the laundry to support itself.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, Ross. And just kind of looking at some of the comments and questions here, Andrew posted a link to the Laundromat FAQ videos on our YouTube channel. I have a video just on due diligence. I have a video on valuation. And so, and we also have good resources on that. So valuation, like I said, we could take a 3 hour tour just on values of stores, but if you bear in mind a multiple of the net, trying to get a decent return on your cash, if you understand that the age and condition of the equipment is absolutely critical, and perhaps even more so, the terms and duration of the lease really have a lot to do with the value. If you think about, you have a business that's generating cash flow, right? But it's protected by a lease that's finite, right? In terms of how many years are left. And so when you're out of lease, you're out of business. And so that is a situation that you really have to make sure is buttoned up. And again, by definition, a lot of the stores for sale have old equipment and short leases.
And make sure you're looking at least 12 months, trailing 12 months of revenue, because if you're looking at a business right now in December, well, December is some of our best months of the year. You look at us back in August and September, and a lot of us were crying.
Yeah,
Um,
it is seasonal. It is seasonal in a
so
lot of
you got to
markets.
make sure you're seeing an average across the board, and that's why when you start getting into the due diligence, we ask for 12 months of utilities, because there's formulas out there
Mhm.
that can calculate within a margin of what the income is based off of utilities.
Yeah,
So
yep, absolutely. Both as a percentage, and I got some of those percentages to share here on a slide. But particularly the water volume, you look for things that don't lie, or it's hard to lie. Water volume is kind of a hard thing. I mean, it doesn't lie very much. And you can typically convert that water consumption into cycles, and you know how much per cycle based on the vend price, et cetera, et cetera. So there definitely are some things. And yes, we have a white paper on that through the association that you can study on. So well, great. Let me get through a few more slides, and I see a few more questions queuing up here. I think we covered this pretty well, but I just want to make sure we tie off on financing. And the way I sized it up is, like Ross said, most first timers need to cobble together multiple resources to make it happen. Even for veteran operators need to probably tap into a couple different resources. And so, look, if you got a strong balance sheet, you have other businesses, and you've got a great relationship with your regular conventional bank, awesome, go for it. Um, the SBA does tend to like the laundromat business. They have experience with laundromats. But again, you got to find that local lender who kind of carries the SBA flag and is experienced in walking customers through that. That certainly goes a long way. These captive finance companies that are either owned by one of the equipment manufacturers or have close relationships with the equipment manufacturers is where the majority of the lending is happening. And you can kind of see where we had to kind of create our own ecosystem as an industry, to kind of fund it. And if you're sort of reading between the lines, it's really the equipment that kind of serves as a good chunk of the collateral, if you will. And whereas a conventional bank, if they get a bunch of equipment, laundry equipment back, they don't know what to do with it. Believe me, I heard that during the recession. A bank that had to take a store back, and they're like, well, what do I do with these machines? In the industry, they certainly don't want to see a loan go bad, but worst case scenario, they could remarket the equipment and try to recover whatever may have been lost. As Ross said earlier, in limited opportunities, seller financing may be available. But again, there's just no way around. You're going to need some of your own personal savings to bring to the package in order to make it happen. But again, we've got a white paper on financing as well. So a lot of good things that you can learn about there. I wanted to share some of these profitability insights. And again, this is just an affirmation that we do have a lot of benchmarking uh, 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 inventory through the association that you can put your hands on. And sometimes I think it's better to start with expenses. And where we talked about due diligence earlier, Ross may have lived this experience. Sure, people may oversell or over represent their income. But in my experience, even more common is people underrepresenting their expenses when they're trying to show you their pro forma. So I wanted to share a couple things here from our survey. So utilities are our kind of our primary variable cost, right? The more laundry you do, the more utilities you use. And so the um, expense ratio for that really speaks loudly to how profitable a store is going to be. So if you take water, sewer, gas, and electric divided by your gross sales, you're going to get this average. And if you're looking at an old store, a zombie mat, maybe that number is 30%, 35%, 40%. Conversely, if a store is brand new or newly equipped with the latest and greatest machines, it might be at 12%, 13%, 15%. So this would be some quick math that you could do on store opportunities that you're looking at and understand that the average, statistical average is at 20%. So 20 cents of every dollar coming into the laundromat goes to pay the utility bill. But 15 to 20% would be even better. Rent varies greatly, not just in terms of the rate, but as a percentage of your sales. And so the statistical average is running about 24%, 23% across the industry based on our benchmarking survey. If you ask most laundromat owners, Ross, I guess you probably prefer that rent not get much higher than 20% of gross if you can stand it.
Yeah, I mean, just like utilities, lower is better.
Lower is better, right?
And
Uh, in
you don't
payroll,
see it too often, but gross leases versus triple net leases, it's much more common to see a triple net lease now. I'm lucky enough to have a couple gross leases, meaning everything is in your rent payment. There's no additional,
right.
uh, if the taxes or insurance goes up for the owner, they can't pass it along to you. That's why they're not very common anymore
Yeah,
because
yeah,
they want to be able to pass that expense on.
absolutely right. And payroll, again, tends to vary even more because as there are some unattended stores. There's some folks that are partially attended, maybe during most of the hours, but not all the hours. But if we're excluding any compensation to you as the owner, these are where the percentages lay out. Minimum wage is a lot higher in LA than it is in other places. But these are really kind of your main costs of doing business are the utilities, the rent, and the payroll. Okay, so you can kind of use that as a reference, and if you want to take a deeper dive, you can put your hands on our annual survey.
And you'll see so often when you're looking at somebody selling a store, you might not you might see help $500 or something. Uh, um, you have to assume that the owner is probably doing a lot of stuff themselves and they are probably paying somebody cash. We've gone over it many times that laundry attendants or cleaners are not a 1099 employee. They need
Right.
to be on payroll. Um,
Mm-hmm.
New Jersey last year had a huge crackdown uh,
Yep.
of of people not being paid properly. More and more cities are doing it, so it's just not worth it.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but there is such a thing as a buyer's net versus a seller's net, right? And you have to kind of do your level best to try to value the store based on your net, right? So if they're paying under the table and you're going to be paying properly, you got to build that cost basis in to make sure that your offer is informed by, what your expenses are going to look like. And the same thing would be on this equipment question. If you need to re-equip it, you're going to have to make sure that that's built into your offer and understand that better. So with some peril, I share the following. With some of the averages in terms of profitability and gross that come out of our survey. So again, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. There's stores that churn out 50,000 a year, and there's stores that turn out 3 million a year. I mean, it's all over the board. But the statistical average are provided here, which do tie back to that 2,850 square feet, right? So if you want to kind of look at some per square foot revenue numbers. But again, in our surveys, when you got a tight margin between the mean and the median, that means your survey is probably doing a pretty good job. And then in terms of profit margin, again, excluding debt service, just the operating expenses of the business, 25% is where the average is kicking in. Plenty of stores that are losing money, and we have plenty of members that are at a 40% margin. So it really just depends on each store and really, frankly, how well you control the expenses that we talked about earlier. But just to kind of give you some context of how these stores perform. Another one that is just, again, more of a blanket number and maybe speaks to some of this sort of steady and resilient nature of the business. This is what the industry revenue growth on a per store basis has looked like over the last few years. So, we said it during the recession, we said it during the pandemic, like flat is the new up. In other words, no one wants to be 7% down, but in the context of COVID in 2020, I think most everybody would be very happy to very happy to do that. So, the industry has been very steady. If you look back further, as I have, you see a lot of 5, 6, 7% growth year over year. And again, every individual store is different, but this is what the statistics have to say about that. I promised earlier a buy or build. Again, we are recording this and we will be sharing this out with you. And so I won't read this back, but again, there's pros and cons to buying versus building that you'll have to take into consideration as you look to get started. We've tried to beat leases to death, but I'm going to give it another whack over the head here before we let you go because it's just so critical. You cannot operate without a proper lease. Again, not just the cost, not just the fine print, which can be super valuable and important, but also making sure that you have enough time left on the lease to enjoy your investment going forward. And ideally, be adding to that lease term. So when it comes time for you to sell, you've got an attractive remaining lease term to offer an educated buyer. So when you look at this list, Ross, when you look at a 10-year minimum or 20 to 25 years total, do those things kind of ring true for you, or what are some of the things that you look at?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have a minimum of 10 years or you can't finance new equipment.
Right.
So, and it's not uncommon to see a lot of stores that are in their option periods or whatnot. You just have to make that one of your contingencies during due diligence. And I admit it seems kind of a cart before the horse a lot of times when you start getting serious and making offers on a laundromat that you are basically making a commitment, or not a full commitment, but making an offer to purchase something before you even get into dealing with the landlord and getting approved by the landlord and getting a new lease from the landlord. So it's contingencies that we put in when making offers. There's all of these contingencies that have to work, or you can pull back out and then make sure once the whatever your first due diligence is completed and you open escrow, all deposits go to escrow. I just saw on a forum somebody talking about giving a deposit to a seller. Absolutely not. Do it. Go through escrow. Especially any owners that were in the business through COVID. Many of us received COVID funds of some sort. So a lot of owners think that they can just keep that loan and sell their business because it's a great low interest rate, or they forget about it because it's such a small payment. Escrow will find stuff like that. You need to go through escrow. Um, and
Nice, yeah.
on leases, the one other additional thing we're seeing more and more here in California, I'm sure there's other cities, but a buyout clause. And as Brian talked about earlier, a laundromat cannot be picked up and moved like a clothing store or something. So we're seeing owners try to slip in buyout clauses with $1,000 buyout because if they sell the building to tear it down, um, and they can just end your lease abruptly. And so you got to make sure that if they want to end your lease in 5 years, there is a very, very significant buyout clause. Um, so we're seeing that.
That's the fine print, Ross. That's this fine
Yes.
print that you have to use an attorney that understands commercial real estate. Ideally, you've got someone who understands the laundromat business, or at least will read our white paper on the
Yeah.
topic and make sure that those interests are being represented. Without a lease, you are out of business. And so just you got to just repeat that to yourself all the time and just understand that really what you're really buying is cash flow from a business, and that cash flow is only continues if it's got enough lease going forward to protect that and to make sure that that's coming your way. So again, a 3-hour topic on one
Yeah,
slide.
and as you get into this, if you're using a broker or using an attorney, you might spend 5 grand and then have to walk away from the deal. But I mean, I own 12 stores. We still use a broker, use an attorney to go over everything. And um, because another set of eyes, it's easy to get excited about a project, but don't cut the corners for 5 grand when you're talking about a business that can be well over 1 million. Um,
Yeah. No, really, really, really good advice. And yeah, I think that's well stated.
When
Um,
you're, and one thing when you're thinking about financing, I like to kind of think about it like you're going to buy a house. Get all your ducks in a row. Um, know what your credit looks like. Don't use Credit Karma. And figure a talk with your attorney again, what kind of structure you're going to have for the business. Start to get all of that stuff in order so that you are ready to talk with the banks. They're going to need your taxes if you are working. Just get all of that in a nice Google file so it's ready to send over. It it makes you look better and it will make the process a lot easier.
well, the way I call that, make yourself easy to help, right? Make
Yes.
yourself easy to help, be organized, have the ducks in a row, and don't be that customer that they're having to hound. I'm going to get into some of these other resources and other things I want to share out, but I was going to try to squeeze in a question from Karen that for you, which is advantages and disadvantages of accepting cashless payments as a laundromat owner. I think you're a pretty vocal proponent of the way you do things. So again, we're being brand agnostic here, but what is your answer on kind of the card versus coin and kind of what your philosophy has been over those large grouping of stores?
We are full card stores. We started hybrid initially, but I think one of the biggest things that continues to kind of be misrepresented is cashless. We're not cashless. We are coinless. And part of introducing that when we come into a new location is no matter what our model is going to be long term with the store being attended or unattended, they're attended to begin with, and we are prepared to take coins and convert that to cash for the card for people until they're used to that we aren't a quarter store. But we definitely take cash. We take card, debit, credit. Most of the um, stores will take Apple Pay, or a lot of the systems these days have their own app base too that you can load money right on the app in the phone. So even though we're card only, we still take every option basically except for quarters. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and part of that is just growth strategy. In the beginning, when we were hybrid, I couldn't go away for more than 3 days, unless you want to turn over that changer key to somebody that you trust. But that's a changer is the keys to the kingdom.
Absolutely right.
And
That,
so
yeah.
just to be able to grow, we just couldn't do the quarters anymore. So,
Yeah, no, I think that's well said, and I just love that little piece of due diligence you worked in there. When you buy a store, spend the money, change every lock and key in the place, from the back to
yes,
the front, to every machine, every changer, every back door. Um, do yourself a favor, change out all the keys when you transact a store. You just don't know who's got copies of keys, and if you've got keys to, especially to the changer, you've got a silent partner potentially.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Well, so a couple questions popped up here about, lenders, like Mitchell's asking about laundromat lenders. So at laundryassociation.org, our website, we have a supplier and distributor directory, right? So you can go in by your state and find who the local equipment dealers are. You could also go into a manufacturer and service provider directory, and you can get a list of all the lenders. You can get a list of everyone who makes washers. You can get a list of who has the card systems. So laundryassociation.org is a great a resource for that. So we've mentioned our YouTube channel. You can follow us on the socials. A couple other things that I would like to share out. Ross mentioned at the very beginning that we did an in-person new investor kind of one-day crash course with a bunch of um, you know peers to share, and so it was really well accepted. So next year we've got in the spring 3 different cities. So it's going to be the same program. Just come to the one that the date's more convenient or it's closer to you: LA, Charlotte, and Chicago. And so again, if you're really serious about this, take the time to go get educated, and it's really gonna pay off for you. So you can get more information on that on our website under events. That events tab will also tell you about any local events that are coming your way, which there's at least one a month somewhere in the country. There's a lot of great Facebook groups. Ross's is called what? Laundromat Owners, I think, is what yours is called. Ours is called Laundromat Professionals Network. I mentioned that we have business services. Laundromat insurance is real tough right now, folks, and so we've had our own insurance agency since 1988. All we do is insure laundromats, and get your hands on that. We can help with getting the best prices on natural gas and electricity for those of you that are in deregulated markets. We have some great digital solutions. So you'll see a full list on the website, but there are a lot of things we can do to help you. Uh,
Brian, what about the new?
yes, Ross is our resident business credit card expert, and he has in his hot hands there the CLA credit card, which we put together just
Hot off the
recently.
press.
Yeah, well, so look, the point is that we were able to use our strength in numbers to put together some cool programs. We even have some discount programs with some of the vendors, like I mentioned, insurance, digital marketing, and other things. So of course, just be a member, right? Join the organization. As I like to say, spend a few $100s before you spend a few 100,000. And what I was referencing with some of the educational resources, I say for $600 or with the promo $500, you can get a bachelor's degree in laundromats. Get your undergrad, get that base of knowledge underneath you, and as I said earlier, everyone who joins can have one-on-one time with me. I take member questions and calls every day. I'll be doing that this afternoon. So you don't have to do this on your own. There is help available. And we appreciate you spending so much time with us today that we included a promo code there to take a few dollars off of that. And just thank you. Like I said, we share your excitement for the business after all these years. We still love the industry, but we also think it's really important to give you vetted, authoritative, experienced advice. And so we hope that you got a lot out of this, and we look forward to be part of your laundromat journey going forward. Ross, I join everybody here in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing your real life experience. That just means a ton to everybody on board here. So thank you
Yeah,
for your time today. Anything else that you want to share before we sign off?
well, I mean, I think you'll find the more you start getting into this industry and talking with owners, we weirdly really like talking about laundries. Uh, and no matter where you are in the country, reach out in the different Facebook chats to find somebody local. I
Mhm.
mean, I can be bought with some wine or dinner. I welcome people if they're in my city or visiting to stop by my laundries. If they reach out to me ahead of time, I always will try to meet up with somebody. And I am definitely not the only one in this industry that is like that. So um, just be mindful of everybody's time, but be sure to reach out to everybody too.
Yeah.
There's
Yep.
a lot of people that will talk to you.
Yeah,
And
we've got a great culture in this industry of sharing and supporting one another, especially the newbies, because again, we've been there, we've done that. We don't want you to make mistakes that you can avoid. And so, yes, you're welcome, Kelly. You're welcome, Sakina. You're welcome, Sarah. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time. Signing off.
thank you.